field didn't work. And really, we didn't get out of the Depression until probably 1948 or 1949. What the war did do was help the unemployment statistics by killing a lot of the unemployed. I mean, it did do that. In fact, he drafted 20% of the workforce at one point or another into the military. So when you started out with a 12% unemployment rate, yes, I mean, there was much less unemployment. But the vast expenditures on non-productive goods, the erection of a command and control economy, not that dissimilar from the Soviet economy, price and wage controls, no, that was not economically good. It was economically bad.
What do you think this war will do to the economy?
Well, it's very bad for the economy. I mean, it's a vast transfer of wealth from the productive economy into the government sector, into what, after all, is a socialist enterprise, the U.S. military, and therefore economically disastrous. So you have all kinds of money taken out of productive private savings and investment to build bombs and missiles. It's economically dangerous. And then it, of course, like every single war in our history, it empowers the government to suppress dissent, to abolish civil liberties, to grow. It's one of the reasons the government loved war, because it does enable them to grow and to brand anybody who disagrees with them as unpatriotic.
But the fact that it's a socialist institution, the military, doesn't make it a disposable institution. I mean, you wouldn't want to live in a country that didn't have a strong military to defend you, would you? No, of course, you have to have soldiers, and you want defense, absolutely. Whether this particular arrangement in this vast centralized the biggest military empire in the history of the world, the U.S., I mean, far surpassing. I mean, our budget is bigger than the next 27 countries. You feel safer because of that?
No, I don't feel safe at all. I mean, none of it is spent on defense, for example. It's all spent on offense. And there's very little defense. It's all, involved in running other people's lives, running other people's countries.
You oppose the war in Vietnam?
Yes.
And you oppose this war?
Well, I oppose any war that's not absolutely necessary and absolutely moral and defensive. So that, for example, killing we don't know how many, 3,000, 4,000 people in Afghanistan to go after the Taliban, who are, after all, the descendants of the exact same guys that Ronald Reagan was funding during as mujahideen when they went up against the Soviet Union. I don't think that's good. I don't think there's any proof that they had anything to do with 9/11. I think it was just striking out, and I think it's very unfortunate. I think it's just killing.
This morning I heard a chilling report on National Public Radio about how Saddam Hussein tortures people. I mean, he's clearly a demonic man himself. Couldn't you concede that Bush really does believe he's on a moral mission to rid the world of a monster?
I'm sure Saddam Hussein is not a good guy. After all, he's a politician. But it is the most liberal regime in the Arab world in many senses. You can get a drink in Baghdad, unlike in Saudi Arabia. Women don't have to wear any particular kind of clothing. Christianity is tolerated. There are high officials of the Iraqi government who are Christians, unlike in any Arab government that we're pals with. So there was a very interesting story on Morning Edition the other day about a gun shop.
Right.
Yeah, a gun shop in Baghdad, and how there was a run on everybody buying guns. And the fact that you can buy a gun in downtown Baghdad, which of course you can't do in Manhattan, is also an unusual peek into this regime. I mean, we only know what the government is telling us.
But doesn't a Saddam Hussein, who is obviously himself a megalomaniac, doesn't a Saddam Hussein armed with biological and chemical weapons, potentially nuclear weapons, doesn't that scare the hell out of you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the fact that George Bush has all those things too. And of course, we know there's only one government in the world that's ever dropped atomic bombs on civilians, and it's not Iraq. So, there are a lot of governments that are run by bad guys. I mean, look at the people who were in Rwanda and killed millions of people by machete. I mean, hard to conceive of anything much worse than that. So, yes, I don't like the idea of any government like this having those kinds of weapons. But, is it really the job of the U.S. government to run the world? I mean, a lot of my...
Well, what would a libertarian actually say about what the president should do about Saddam Hussein?
I think read a book. Think about helping the American people. Think about taking the burden off us. Think about what he could do to lessen this recession that Mr. Greenspan has brought on us. That is by cutting government, not expanding government, cutting the military, cutting the welfare budget, cutting the regulations. He's, of course, vastly increased regulations on business.
But do you really believe there's nothing the government can do to improve our lot but to get out of the way?
Yeah, that's about it. Certainly that's true in the economy. I mean, now that we're in this recession, That's all it could do, and certainly that's what Mr. Bush ought to be doing. That is, cutting spending, cutting taxes, cutting regulations. Get the heck out of the way.
But what about such things as unemployment benefits? All those 8 million people, that guy who wrote the 700 letters and can't find a job. I mean, don't we have some, doesn't the moral imperative in all of us collectively want to try to help people like that while they are in distress?
You know, this illustrates the basic fallacy at the heart of the welfare state, that it subsidizes what it seeks to prevent or pretends to cure. So it subsidizes unemployment. I remember when Mr. Bush Sr., when he was running for re-election, and there was concerns about the unemployment rate, and so he passed a vast expansion of unemployment benefits. And gee, just amazingly enough, the unemployment rate went way up when people could get more money for a longer period of time staying unemployed. So the government is subsidizing unemployment. No, I do not think that's a good thing. I think it's very socially destructive.
I obviously, as you know, disagree with so much of what you're saying, although I learn from people with whom I disagree more than I learn from people with whom I agree. I just cannot imagine what kind of society it would be if it is every man for himself.
Well, but it's not. I mean, that's what the market brings about social cooperation. We work together in company.
Didn't bring it in the 30s.
No, the 30s was, of course, a terrible time, brought about as a result of Federal Reserve inflation during the 1920s, and then the rotten Hoover administration, which actually was the first part of the New Deal. So we had, again, exactly like in the 90s, we had a boom during the 20s, artificially generated by the Federal Reserve. And yes, it caused immense human suffering. And again, the Roosevelt administration and the Hoover administration did everything wrong. It's almost, it was not their intention, but it's almost as if they set out to lengthen and prolong the Depression. And again, that we have Herbert Hoover Bush doing exactly the same thing now.
You are consistently against the warfare state and the welfare state, right?
Yes, sir.
But in this discussion, you've been so critical of the Republicans that am I to assume you're going to enroll as a Democrat next year?
Well, you know, there's a professor at Harvard, Jeffrey Frankel, who's written a paper on arguing that the two parties have switched positions ideologically, and that the Republican Party, is, despite rhetoric, is today the party of big government, and the Democrats are the party of lesser government. So very interesting. I was raised a Republican. I suppose it bothers me more because they use some of the rhetoric that I believe in to cover up the opposite of what I believe in. So it's, we'll have to see. I mean, is it possible that if the Democrats are smart, they would indeed come out on a more pro-peace, smaller government side? And that, of course, is the history of the Democratic Party in the 19th century. It was the good party. And the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, is the party of militarism, of aggressive war, of inflation, of big business, big government partnership, of suppression of civil liberties, and all the other things we're all too familiar with.
There are people who would disagree with you that in the 1950s, the Democratic Party, which upheld slavery and segregation in the South, was the good party.
Well, I think, I'm not saying that any political party is all good. Obviously, there were bad things about the Democrats, and I wish George Washington had known slaves either. We've had this unfortunate business in our country for a very long time.
But with all due respect, you didn't answer my question. Are you going to enroll as a Democrat?
Well, no, because I must say I'm nonpartisan. I don't like any of the parties. So I also don't think politics, electoral politics, is our salvation. I don't.
Well, where do people go who are morally and politically agents?
Well, I think if people want to be in politics, that's their own business. It's just, for me, it's not the right thing. And I think that we have to educate ourselves and educate others about our own history, our real history, about what's actually going on these days, about real economics and the principles of liberty. And I think that is, if we have any salvation, it's through that, certainly in secular terms.
If people want to know more about your ideas and your work, what can they do?
Well, they can look at the Mises Institute website, and that's mises.org. And I have my own daily news site, too. It's lewrockwell.com, L-E-W, rockwell.com.
Thank you very much, Lew Rockwell, for joining us on Now.